Welcome to another episode of Trial Site News. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the trend that has been transpiring around the world, and which has now finally come to the US. They're calling it the pandemic of the vaccinated, as CDC data now reveals a majority of COVID-19 deaths are occurring among the vaccinated and boosted Americans. We'll discuss what is happening here. And so from Trial Site News, I am Adrian, and our episode is starting right now. So, as we've chronicled in previous episodes on this channel, the trend of deaths and hospitalizations of individuals vaccinated and or boosted has been rising. And now that trend has reached here in the US. The Washington Post, of all places, announced the official declaration that this is no longer a pandemic of the unvaccinated, as the majority of COVID-19 related deaths in America now occur among the fully vaccinated or boosted, this according to data from the CDC. Now, the analysis here was done by Cynthia Fox with the Kaiser Family Foundation, otherwise known as the KFF. She said that 58% of COVID-19 deaths by August 2022 were among the vaccinated, revealing that the COVID-19 vaccine was not conferring the protection that the US government has been promising and constantly promoting. And the trend is not good here. The Kaiser Family Foundation reported that by September 2021, 23% of all COVID-19 deaths were among the vaccinated. This figure jumped up to 42% by January and February of 2022, and now here we are in August, and the percentages hit 58% of all COVID-19 mortalities. As the Washington Post put it, for the first time, a majority of Americans dying from the coronavirus received at least the primary series of the vaccine. And now it seems ever more likely that as the majority of the American population is vaccinated, the total number of COVID-19 deaths will become even more overwhelmingly among the vaccinated populations. So now the question arises, will this change the current administrative narrative? Will they use this to try and strengthen the case to get booster vaccines, or does it challenge the notion that these are successful products at all? After all, they promised the nation that these vaccination shots would get us back to normal. The whole point of the lockdowns that we all endured, we were told, was to hold on until the vaccine came about. We were going to have a cure. Remember? I sure do. And I'm sure most of you remember as well. According to the article in the Washington Post, Cynthia Cox with the Kaiser Family Foundation said, like many experts, she is not surprised by the ratio shift, and there are a few reasons that they point out. First, at this point in the pandemic, a large majority of Americans have received at least their primary series of coronavirus vaccines, so it makes sense that vaccinated people are making up a greater share of fatalities. Individuals at greater risk of dying from a coronavirus infection, such as the elderly, are also more likely to have received the shots. And vaccines lose potency against the virus over time, and variants arise that are better able to resist the vaccines, so continued boosters are needed to continue to prevent illness and death. Now, worth noting here, and something that we here at Trial Site News reported back on in September of 2021, that Albert Bourla, Pfizer's CEO, said at the time that the COVID-19 vaccines wouldn't be enough, and that antivirals as well represented a critical tool in the fight against COVID-19. Yet, the vaccines were mandated even in many school districts where the risk-benefit calculus was highly questionable. Of course, about 68% of the nation's population is fully vaccinated, meaning that only 32% are unvaccinated, so clearly there are more vaccinated persons, and many of the deaths will continue to be the elderly and at risk. However, the trend is still concerning, and it is something that we here at Trial Site News picked up on early in other heavily vaccinated nations such as Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Singapore, and elsewhere over this past year. For example, during the first 3.5 months of 2022, Australia had twice as many COVID-19 deaths as all of 2020 and 2021 combined. And the vast majority of the population was fully vaccinated even by then. And this trend was also apparent in the heavily vaccinated nations in Europe, such as Scotland. Now, interestingly enough, the Washington Post piece still emphasizes the need for the booster shot. Here is what they wrote on the matter. They said that it is still true that vaccinated groups are at a lower risk of dying from a COVID-19 infection than the unvaccinated when the data is adjusted for age. An analysis released by the CDC last week underscores the protection that additional booster shots offer against severe illness and death as immunity wanes. Let's take a look at deaths in August. When the highly contagious BA.5 Omicron variant reached its peak, that month, unvaccinated people aged 6 months and older died at about 6 times the rate of those who had received their primary series of shots. People with one booster dose were even better protected. Unvaccinated people over the age of 5 had about 8 times the risk of dying from a coronavirus infection than those who received a booster shot. Among individuals who were eligible to receive additional booster shots, the gap is even more striking. Unvaccinated people 50 and up had 12 times the risk of dying from COVID-19 than adults the same age with 2 or more booster doses. Now, the Washington Post goes on to bemoan the fact that people are not getting the updated booster shots, with just 35 million Americans participating in this latest wave, which is roughly 10% of the US population. Why? Well, because the protection from the existing version 1.0 COVID-19 vaccine wanes to the point that by half a year or so, there is little protection against severe disease and death at all. Which, of course, is why so many more fully vaccinated people are now dying. Naturally, though, there was a lot of concern among the population at large for this never-ending booster shots of the vaccine. Critics have voiced concerns about long-term effects of stacking booster shots, and based on what we see now with the hesitancy of the American public, the fervent belief that the vaccine will stop the pandemic seems to be fading with the American people. However, the White House has gone ahead and announced a 6-week push ahead of the holidays aimed at increasing booster uptake among seniors and people who are racial minorities. As Ashish, White House coronavirus SARS, said on the New Strategy, quote, "I feel very confident that if people continue to get vaccinated at good numbers, if people get boosted, we can absolutely have a very safe and healthy holiday season." Now, it'll be interesting to see if they can move the needle of American vaccine hesitancy going forward. In the meantime, though, we of course will continue to keep an eye on this situation going forward, and naturally will update you as this story develops. And that, my friends, will bring our episode to a close once more. As always, thank you so much for joining me on the program today. From Trial Site News, I am Adrian, and I will see you all next time.